You'd have thought that having a working business model was pretty essential for the financial success of any company, but the latest research in long-range planning has found that only a third of companies can coherently articulate what their business model is, which means that two-thirds of companies can't. It seems extraordinary. I asked Professor Charles Baden-Fuller, the man behind the research, how you could tell if a company hadn't got a clear business model.
A lot of people think business models are very complicated. In fact, it's a very simple thing, but it has two parts. The first part of the business model is it captures what the business is about. So it's a story of what the business is about. And it has two elements. What is the way we create value? In other words, why would you want to buy our service or product? And what is the way we capture the value, which is how do we get payment for the effort we're making at doing what we're doing. So in very simple terms, most companies make a product and the customer who uses the product, like the soap, buys the product off the shelf. But there are some business models that are a little more complicated. Google, you go on Google and you use their services, but you don't pay for them. Someone else pays for it, and that's the advertising company. And they pay for it because you look at their advert on the web and they pay Google some money every time you look at one of the web pages. So the value capture process is often more complicated than it looks because the user isn't always the person who pays, that is the customer. And the value creation process is also more complicated than it looks because the company that might be selling it to you might actually be outsourcing the components to another part of the world, say India or China. So there's a value chain behind it. So the business model captures the process of the value creation and the process of the value capture. And in many cases it's very simple. I make and I sell, but in other cases it's more complicated. I outsource and someone else pays and you use. So that's the nature of what the business model is about.
So how do you know if a company hasn't got a working business model?
Well, there's two elements to the business model also. What is it today and what is it tomorrow? And you are asking a question about tomorrow, but let's first of all deal with the today question. A business model is how do we operate today? And a lot of companies may not have a very robust business model today, say a startup internet company or a startup high-tech company, but it's working towards making a robust business model tomorrow. So when people talk about a robust business model, they mainly talk about the future. Is the company got a future? And there's two important questions about a robust business model. Does the business model have any kind of sustainable competitive advantage against competitors? And that's the value creation side. But also is the value capture side. Is there any chance that it's going to grow or become big? What I call the scaling question. Is more than one person going to buy this thing? Is it just going to be my family or friends, or is it actually going to populate the UK or maybe even the whole world? So Apple started off as having no robust business model with the iPhone. It was a gizmo. Everyone thought it was something which wasn't going to last. But in fact, it created a really robust business model of something which has legs, people use, applications, etc. So something which isn't robust today could be robust tomorrow, and that's part of the business model question.
Your future value research found that only 1/3 of companies explained their business model clearly and coherently, which means extraordinarily 2/3 didn't. How can that be?
It is extraordinary. I mean, the current economic climate, when every child from school has to explain what it is they learned in the lesson today, and every teacher has to explain what it is they're doing, teaching a child, and how they're going to deliver value to the parents and to the kids, you would think that a board of directors should be able to explain what is the business model of the company, why it should exist. The trouble is, too many of them have really not been thinking about that public face, that they are the public face of the company. They have to explain what the business is about. After all, if they can't explain, then quite rightly people worry about the longevity of the company. And so one very important thing is how to explain what the company is about. And just as when you go to an art exhibition, you know the difference between an untalented artist who can't paint a decent picture and a really talented artist who can make a landscape or a portrait come alive, so there is a talent in making the explanation come alive. And that's where people haven't really understood. There's a lot of good research about making that explanation really well, so the company seems really what it is, if not more than what it is, as opposed to it being something which is thought up at the last minute and not very good.
And making that explanation really come alive could do great things for struggling companies.
It can certainly do well. I think there's two reasons why it could do wonders for a struggling business. The board of directors needs to get to grips with why the business is struggling, and they can only really do that if they understand what the business model is today and what it is tomorrow. And secondly, it's like a lot of things in life, they've got to have a good story. A story to sell, a story to motivate the employees, the customers, the suppliers, and the long-term financiers why they should continue to support the struggling business. And having a good story, a good business model that really explains the business well is something very important. And we have learned in our research some interesting things about business models which people don't really understand. One of them is, the word model is also, ask any man, or a model is something, a toy car. You remember as a kid you had this toy car, you opened the bonnet and looked inside, you could open the doors, you could open the boot, you could push it along the floor. To you it was a model Ferrari, a Model T Ford. By the way, you couldn't put petrol in it, it didn't go. But when you gave it to someone, they looked at it and said, this is a Ferrari, this is a Ford, this is a tractor, a John Deere tractor. The business model often is like that, a working model that tells you the essence. But it's also like the model on the catwalk, the famous iconic person. So in other words, people should say, I'm more like Google than I am like IBM. You're saying to people, I'm more looking to the future than I am looking to the past. And so when there are terms and things that we can learn about how to describe our business models, which come from academia, that can really help business very much in this game.
So what's the way to sort this out for a company that realises it's got to get on top of this? What's the first step?
Well, I think there's two things. One, the top management of the board of directors really has to understand that they've got to have a proper story. Now, the new code of corporate governance requires every company, listed company, to describe its business model in its reporting requirements. This is new. But of course it's blindingly obvious. And indeed, when people have surveyed these companies, this is why we discovered 2/3. Future Value described that 2/3 didn't do it. So what they've got to do at one level, the board of directors has got to get to grips and sit down and think about, well, how do we describe the business going to these public faces? And the other thing is they have to work out a plan with management about analyzing, does our business model really have sustainable competitive advantage? Are we really scaling and optimizing what we think we have to do? And work out a plan with management about how we're going to design a better business model for the future. And that requires an awful lot of work. So that's something that the company has to do at the board. And that really focuses about what the strategy agenda is about. It's not about dreaming for the future. It's about making sure that we understand what we have today and making sure it's fit for purpose for tomorrow.